Welcome to the American Institute of Healthcare Professionals video on multicultural proficiency in counseling. And this is an important subject because so many times counselors are not merely dealing with one demographic or one cultural group within a community, but counselors come across many different individuals with different backgrounds. So there is an important need in counseling for multiculturalism. Counselors need to be able to help different population centers that exist within their community. So differences in religion, culture, race, gender, sexual orientation, or even economic statures will all play key roles in helping others and also understanding others in regards to one's particular problems. So the counselor needs to be culturally educated on differences between not only him or herself, but also with others, and how that particular cultural persona of the counselor comes into play when working with clients of different cultural backgrounds. So in that way, what are the biases that exist within oneself as a counselor? What is one's personal faith? What is one's personal morality in itself? So these are things that need to come into play when talking with other individuals, and to be aware of one's own cultural biases or own cultural heritage and how that can play a role in the counseling dynamic itself. So it is essential not only to be aware of others, but also oneself, and to be able to enter into the counseling dynamic, the counseling contract, as one without judgment, without any type of bias, even if they are inherently there, at least being to some extent recognizing them. And I think one way, and this is in many textbooks, is the respectful model. And you will find these in various counseling courses. And the respectful model is merely an acronym for various things to consider when working with other population centers that have different cultures. First, in respectful, the R stands for religious or spiritual background. So it's important to be not only mindful of one's own religion, but also of the faith that might come into play during counseling with an individual who might be of a different faith, might be Christian or Hindu or Jewish or Islamic or Buddhist, or maybe the individual is agnostic or atheist. So it's important to understand where that individual is coming from in regards to their faith. Economic and social background is for E. And so we might have an individual who is a more wealthy counselor who might have issues identifying with individuals who come from poor demographics, less wealthy demographics, and understanding the struggles of not being able to make rent 1 month and so forth. So that is an important recognition as well. Sexual identity. Many individuals identify as heterosexual or homosexual. Others might have different preferences. And in counseling, in an area especially of no judgment, it is essential that we recognize these different type of sexual identities that might exist, and how in counseling our own personal bias or own morality could cause more damage to this particular individual during the counseling session itself. P is for personal style and education. So there are different levels of education that exist within individuals. So if you're dealing with someone who is more well polished, educated throughout college, and they have a higher vocabulary and understanding of concepts, this might be a very different type of exchange of information and understanding information than someone who is not as educated, or someone who might even be of a lower IQ. So these things need to be recognized as you communicate and try to help the client understand the process of healing that exists within counseling itself. Obviously, ethnic and racial identity is important. That's what the E stands for. So there are different cultures and races that experience the same thing quite differently than a particular race or ethnicity might, especially within the United States, within this melting pot that we exist in, where various prejudices are existing within communities and various unjust stigmas that one might experience as opposed to another. Chronological lifespan is for C, and sometimes we have clients who are much older than the counselor or much younger than the counselor. And we have to, in counseling, understand how that might affect the dynamic within the exchange of information itself. T is in for trauma. And this is important to understand when you first take intake of the client and you have a brief story of their history. You need to know what their past trauma might be in regards to what they've experienced in life itself. F is for family, family background and history. So a person's upbringing can play a key role. Did they grow up in a single parent home, or did they grow up with both parents never divorcing? And that can be a big, big difference in terms of how an individual sees the world itself. U stands for unique physical characteristics. So a person with disabilities, person with mental lower IQs, again, this can come into play in how we communicate, how we reevaluate our delivery of therapy to these particular individuals. Location and language also play a role. So a person's land of origin or where a person resides or the language that they speak can create unique challenges in terms of communicating, and also how words are understood. Also, in regards to anything with anyone from different cultures, how certain expressions or emotions are experienced are things that can be very different between different cultures. And in the counseling session, it's important for the counselor to understand what is acceptable in regards to discussing or how one approaches how a certain person feels, because in some cultures it may be perfectly fine, while in other cultures it may be a large issue. Within all cultures, especially minority cultures, there are terms that regard to a culture's heritage or a race's heritage or a religious group's heritage that has experienced a certain collective wound that is not individual, but it is to the group. And it still can display itself in bias or in terms of equal employment or equal opportunity from the sins of the past reappearing in the future. So a soul wound is the term that is utilized in this, and it's someone who is, as a counselor, that is well educated in multiculturalism, clearly understands. You have maybe an African American, a Native American, or those who are struggling in LGBTQ communities who have a history of persecution, unfair historical dates that have occurred against their people. These things are collectively held together within the fabric of that particular community, and they can manifest. An example again is with African Americans. Obviously, slavery and the unequal status that was experienced so much through the 19th and many parts of the 20th century. But even today, the manifestation of profiling by the police, how one is pulled over by a police officer if one is an African American versus a Caucasian American. How is that going to affect an individual's trauma just by the fact that there is a historical collective wound of injustice that has existed? And within that, even in everyday situations, there are sometimes unintentional, but sometimes intentional microaggressions from one population group to another, just through how we speak, the words we might use mistakenly, by various looks or actions that are evidence of inherent deeper maybe not malicious, but deeper prejudice or racism that exists within the history of and clash of these two cultures. So when necessary, a counselor should seek social justice for their clients, but they definitely need to be aware of the community that they are counseling and where that community is coming from. And that's where the power of focusing comes in. Carl Rogers emphasized client-based care. And part of that is empathetic listening, but also focusing on the client's need. And part of it is not just the narrative. Part of it is not just the story itself, but also understanding and tracking properly the family of the client, the culture of the client, the faith of the client, the significant others within the family life, so that one is able to get a better understanding of the external sources that have put together this individual, that have shaped and formed this individual over the years itself. So cultural focusing can be a key tool used by counselors to help them better understand. And within this cultural awareness, one of the common terms used is the family genogram. And this is sometimes a very helpful exercise to do in counseling with someone who is suffering from family issues or cultural issues that are manifesting on themselves individually. So the family genogram simply looks at a diagram and a research into the individual's background to share and see what struggles their own family has been through, or where trauma has come from a particular family member. And it helps diagram and present a clear picture of that individual's background within the immediate structure, within the immediate family itself. Beyond that would be more cultural, but this is just within the immediate family itself. Now, what this can help with at the family level is anchoring. And that's a term we use for someone who is maybe suffering from trauma that has occurred due to maybe their identity or their cultural background or their faith, and how they can compare to past generations, whether it's a grandmother or whether it is someone further back in the history books that shared their culture, and not only share in their success, but also shared in what they are experiencing. And it's obvious that suffering alone is a lot harder than suffering together. And when we suffer together, there's community. That's why we have support groups. So this anchoring is a way to compare, to deal with a social injustice or trauma, and to be able to allow the individual to anchor themselves to this other particular story, to find solidarity, and in that solidarity to grow and heal. Now, the cross model is an interesting way of how others become more aware or less aware of a particular cultural bias that exists. Within the first stage, when individuals exist within a melting pot, there is the state of conformity. The individual is unaware of the cultural bias, rather naive. And you could say that, little children are particularly, they know no color, they know no different faith. They just see another person on the playground. Everyone is the same. And that's the way it should be. But unfortunately, we know the cruelty of the world. The second stage is what we refer to as dissonance, when the individual starts to go, something is wrong, which can lead to self-doubt or self-appreciation even. It can make one become more proud in themselves. So that little child on the playground who might look different might start discovering looks from the other adults as their child plays with them. And that one little child might start to wonder, why is the other adults looking at me in this different way? And that's where the dissonance can start to occur, whether young or at a older age itself. So within the third stage, according to Cross, we see resistance or immersion within the cultural group. Resistance to the bias that's existing, or very much an immersion into just accepting this reality and moving forward. The fourth stage is introspection, where the individual actually becomes part of the group. The individual labels themselves as part of this group, but not at the level of what they would refer to at the fifth stage as integrative awareness, where there's a full sense of care of oneself and cultural heritage. And it's more than just saying I'm part of this group, but there is a immense pride of oneself and one's cultural heritage. And it's done through action, social action, protesting, or through greater appreciation of culture, a collection of art and things like that. And in a way, this is anchoring. One is finding, no matter what other biases might exist or traumas might exist, I have a pride in my particular heritage or faith. And it is a strength. It is not a weakness. And I think as counselors, during counseling sessions, it's important to help individuals find where they are in these stages and to help them find anchoring, to find pride in their cultural heritage, and to find it as a source of strength, not a source of stigma or bias. And then to help those individuals cultivate a greater awareness, not just in the counseling room, but for the world itself. And that's how the world becomes a better place. So this is just a little bit on multiculturalism. I think it's an important thing for all counselors to be aware of. Below are our links for grief counseling and Christian counseling. Our number is 330-652-7776, and our email is info@aihcp.org. And there's our reference with the IV textbook, which goes into a lot of multiculturalism. I recommend that text if you have time to copy it. Please do not forget to like and subscribe for our channel. And I'd like to wish you a good day, and to remember to definitely subscribe when you have the chance. Thank you.